Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. My name's Arthur Moore, and I'm joined, as always, by Mike Harrowell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
I'm fantastic, buddy. How are you today?
Yeah, really good, really good. Really loved episode 1 with Claire, where we talked about Rosenshine's principles of instructions, and I'm ready for episode 2.
Well, it's lucky you enjoyed it, Mike, because she's still here. Claire, you're still with us on Tea and Teaching. Hello again.
Hello.
It's so nice to have you back on the pod. I hope you've had a lovely week. So we're going to be talking more Rosenshine today about kind of bringing it into your school, your department where you work. Claire, you've written a book on Rosenshine. You're an author of that, as we covered last time. But I'm just wondering, you didn't just sit down one day and say, I'm definitely going to write a book. I'm just wondering, where did that book come from?
Yeah. So this kind of all started, I'm sure you can remember when we went into lockdown in 2020 and sort of everything kind of stopped in terms of how we were running schools. We were all adapting to online teaching and so on. We wanted for my school, and I was an assistant head at the time, leading on teaching, learning, and professional development across a challenging, comprehensive, and we wanted to do some professional development during the lockdown that would really serve us well when we went back into school. And the school, I had only been there since the September prior to lockdown. So they were kind of very much at the beginning of a journey of becoming a bit more evidence informed. And Tom had written his book, Rosenshine's Principles in Action. I absolutely loved it. And then he had also released a video series on YouTube. And I thought, well, I'll make a workbook for the teachers in my school where they have to watch each of the videos because Tom's kind of done that bit for me. And I'll write questions and reflections and activities, and we'll do this whilst we're in lockdown. And so I wrote this workbook, or it actually existed as kind of 5 different ones at the time. And we all engaged with it as a school. It was a really great way for everyone to start learning about Rosenshine's principles and start doing that reflection, so that when we went back to school, we had that common language, that shared understanding. But I thought, oh, do you know what? I'll share this on Twitter. And I'd never really shared anything before, or been particularly active on Twitter. I'm more kind of someone who just magpies things from other people. And I thought, there's lots of people needing things at the moment. And I just put it up there. And Tom retweeted it. And I think that's when it just kind of really spiraled. And we ended up with just thousands of downloads, people just really, I just hit on something, I think. And so then Tom got in touch and said, we'd really like to publish this with my publishers. What do you think? And obviously I said yes, because why wouldn't you? And it went from there. So we then kind of merged it. There was work in the background to try and turn it into something that could then be an actual book, and I added some sections. But Tom was so incredibly supportive, and I think his professional generosity in just saying, use the videos, base the work on that's not a problem, and then sharing it so freely really kind of just encouraged the popularity of it, and the rest is history, really.
So it feels like you're the perfect person, lucky enough, to kind of talk us through. So let's say I'm kind of in a senior leadership of a school, as the only person on this pod who's not in senior leadership and has been and probably never will be. I feel it's right that I play the role of senior leader. So I'm a senior leader. I'm imagining what it's like, and I'm like, yes, this Rosenshine thing, it sounds great. I want to bring this into my school. That's our big talk in the senior leadership team. What should I be focusing on, Claire, to bring that into my school?
So I'm going to assume that if you're a senior leader who's wanting to do that, you've really kind of explored and questioned and interrogated that this is the right thing for your school, first of all. So, is this the right thing for your context, your children, your priorities? So let's assume it's yes to all of that. And I think it's starting with that generation of a shared understanding and a shared language around what the principles are and why, really encouraging teachers and delivering training that gets people to understand why this is something you're going to embrace as a school. I think, thinking about how I managed to do that, and I guess in a way lockdown served me well, because I then had that opportunity and people were able to kind of engage with that, and we could really get into it when we got back to school. But I would personally start there, and kind of provide that initial overview before then really exploring, well, I wouldn't suggest looking at every single principle and saying, we do Rosenshine's principles of instruction now, so we do this, all of these things. I'd actually really then kind of consider, okay, where are we going to start as a school? Where's our greatest area of need? I look Mark agrees with that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I see it as it's a bit of a toolkit. And you want to help teachers build their toolkit so they can understand the class that's in front of them and what tools they need to help them learn best. And I think if you're trying to teach someone to use all these tools simultaneously, you're just going to get it lost in terms of information overload, cognitive overload. I absolutely agree. Identify your area of most need, and then look for the principles that are going to really, really support that, and how you can get that really good practice across the whole school.
Because that's one thing I was thinking of, someone who's kind of been in those presentations, in the seats kind of listening, is if I'm given like 10, if I'm shown all these 10 things and I'm told I now need to go and do all these things, I'm more likely to be able to do none of them properly because I haven't been able to take them all in. So Claire, like going even more fundamental, if you were like the start of the year kind of delivering that presentation in the hall, everyone's in their civvies because it's the first inset day, like, would you say, here are the 10 principles, we're going to focus on this one? Or would you just say, this is our focus right now? Would you like even mention the 10, or would you just be focusing on the one or two you want to be focusing on?
I would mention the 10 because I think it's really important for people to understand that when you start really looking at, working on the principles and wanting to develop your teaching, each one, they're so integrated, and they link to each other. So once you start exploring one, you're going to end up drawing on kind of knowledge and skills for others. So I think it's important that people have that understanding of the 10. I think you can then kind of say, look, we've identified as a school that we want to focus on this and this. And I personally would then be providing a timeline for people so they can see what we're going to be exploring, when we're going to be exploring it, when we're revisiting, so they can see that iterative process that professional development should be, and kind of just as well really talking about, well, why this, why for us, and really bringing it back to our young people and our context and that kind of thing. And I think you've got to really consider how you're getting that buy-in. And I don't think you can just kind of assume, well, loads of schools are doing Rosenshine now or engaging with Rosenshine, so everyone's going to be on board with it. That's definitely not the case. So I think that's got to be a big part of how you kind of launch something like this.
Mike, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just going back to episode 1 when we spoke about the diverse needs of staff as well. And I think it's about understanding that people are going to be coming at this from different points. You might have some staff, let's say you started in September, you might have some staff that have come from schools that are already doing this and have lots of background knowledge. You're always, with anything new, you're going to have your early adopters, you're going to have your Luddites who are very, very reluctant in terms of adopting it as well. So I think it's about understanding and personalizing those sessions to understand those different starting points and catering to the needs of everyone. So it brings me on to my next question. You're always going to have pushback on this, aren't you? You're always going to have staff who, well, I've always done that. This is just good teaching. So what would your response to that be?
Yeah. And you're so right that there's always people who say, I already do all of these things. My response to that tends to be to look at what Rosenshine was actually saying back in the 80s. So he had a paper in 1986. I want to say it was called Teaching Functions, but don't quote me on that because there were a couple, there was more than one at the time. But in that, he actually says himself, and he's talking about these kind of 6 functions which you can see have real similarities to the principles that he talks about, much later in that paper. But he says himself, these things are nothing new. That what we're looking at here is nothing new. Teachers do these things, but he goes on to say it's the extent to which you do it. And that's what I really highlight to people who say, well, I already do all of this. I kind of really encourage them to think about, great, but how intentional are you with each of these things, and how forensic have you been in really evaluating how effective you are when you're, I don't know, engaging with modelling, for example, or how effective your questioning is. Have you really, really explored and kind of really analysed how effective that is, and where there might be areas that you can improve? Because, yeah, sure, we do these things, but I've certainly had lessons where I get to the end and I think, do you know what? I didn't question effectively. I did move on from that student because in the back of my head, maybe I'm thinking, I've got to get through the curriculum content. We all fall into those traps. No matter how long you've been teaching, or no matter how effective a teacher you are, you have those days where that happens. And so I think it's about really pushing that idea that yeah, you do these things, but we're actually we're not looking at just doing these things. We're looking at really engaging with them on a very, very micro granular level. And that tends to work, in my experience, in kind of explaining that, to people who are a bit reluctant.
Yeah, and I guess that's step one, isn't it? Introducing something to all staff is probably the easiest bit. You stand up at a CPD session, or you lead a series of CPD sessions, you say, this is why we're doing it, this is where we've identified our need, this is what we're going to do, and you tailor that to the needs of your staff. You're then going to essentially hand it over to your heads of department, aren't you? You're going to say, this is what we would like to see in our lessons, this is what we'd like to see in our planning. Go away and do it. So let's say I'm a head of department sitting in that session with you, and I think this is brilliant. Okay, we've gone through providing models, and I think this is perfect for my subject. I know that my staff need to get better at this. I'm so enthusiastic. What do I do now as a head of department to really embed this within day-to-day practice within my subject?
Sorry, my tablet just set up. She's down.
She just loves Rosenshine in department. She heard that and she was like, I'm all in. This is my room on the broom.
Stand aside. Yeah. So what then would a head of department go and do? What would we be asking them to do? I mean, I'm going to kind of flip that a little bit, in the sense that I would like to think that senior leaders, prior to that initial training, are already talking to their middle leaders and already having those discussions around, we're going to engage with this piece of evidence or this piece of literature, and, getting that feedback from them. How might this work in your subject? What can you see might be some of the potential challenges, obstacles, pitfalls, successes, and hope, that's the kind of work that I think should happen before, your big session in the hall, everyone, this is what we're going to engage with. But I think then, once you've got that understanding and you've kind of had those discussions with your middle leaders, what I'd be kind of wanting from them is to really look on a subject specific level with their teams at this evidence and what this is telling us, and kind of have those discussions around, well, okay, what does this look like for us? If our first focus, if we're deciding as a school we're really going to work on modelling, let's get really, really interrogative with the curriculum and work out where we need to improve that. So not just saying, we're going to get better at modelling, let's share some strategies that we use for modelling, but actually really looking at your curriculum and thinking, okay, this is what we've got coming up. These are the really challenging parts, talking about this concept or this process. How are we going to model that? How does really effective modelling look when we're talking about that specific thing? And I think that can make a real difference on a subject level, because you're moving beyond the general, you're moving beyond this is one way you could model, and you're tying it in with those curriculum conversations. And it's just so important that you address kind of subject knowledge alongside pedagogy. So that would be my approach.
Reminds me of, it's always the maths teachers I find, I can say this as part of the community, or in the CPD session being like, this doesn't apply to my subject, maths is different. And then you can actually go into that maths room and be like, right, let's talk about this in a mathsy way, guys. Like, let's see what we can focus in on there. What I was interested just listening to you two, who know way more about this and kind of implementation than I ever will. I think it's really interesting. You're both kind of following Rosenshine's principle of instructions on how you're going to implement Shine's principle of instructions. I don't know if you've noticed that, or if that's something conscious about kind of like where are we at, kind of let's make sure we're checking where we're at. Let's kind of, how are we going to model this? Let's present some steps that you can all kind of do. Right, let's go away and try it. All you do, like, we're kind of talking about Rosenshine's 10 while we're talking about how to implement Rosenshine 10. I don't know if that's conscious or if that's just kind of pure luck. Claire, I don't know if that's something you've noticed before.
I think in terms of this conversation, maybe that's just luck, but I do think that I have certainly kind of looked at before this and talked with staff about the fact that actually these are just great principles for learning, and they align quite closely with principles for effective professional development. So when I was VP leading on teaching and learning, what we always did was kind of use our professional development sessions to model what great teaching looks like. So, we had, and I'm sure most schools have things like this, but we had a policy. You have to have your do now on the board when your children come into the room. And so when we did professional development sessions, whoever was running it, you'd have your do now on the board ready for everyone to engage when they came in. And whoever was running the session would stand on the threshold, greet everyone, as and not in the way that you would with children. It was all kind of matched to how you would work with adults. But it then meant that, I guess, much like you've recognized here with this conversation, that we could then really talk about, look at how this has been structured, look at what we've done, look at how we revisited prior knowledge and that kind of thing. So definitely have seen those similarities along the way.
Mike, you've both spoke about kind of like how you would get people on board beforehand, the heads of department, and think, would you get everyone in the school reading documentation? Would you give everyone the same book? Would you give everyone Claire's book and say, like, you need to read this before you come back in September? Or would you just kind of give it as a, like, if you want to read? Or would you, like, I'm just wondering how you kind of get people on board with kind of the principles behind it, like the actual academic, the work behind it, Mike.
There's multiple ways of going about this. There's multiple ways. Personally, I would buy enough books that everyone got a book about the principles of instruction, and I would give it to them before the summer, and I would say, this is some free reading if you'd like to do it. I'm not going to sit there and tick off that everyone has done their summer homework and they've read their books. But I think, having a reference point for people to go back to in their classrooms and say, oh, I'm trying to plan this. I just need to check how Rosenshine would suggest I do this properly. Because you're going to sit there in a presentation, or you're going to sit there in a professional development program, and you're going to see this on the board, and someone might share their slide deck with you. But having that opportunity to go and read in more depth if you want to. And I think that's a really important culture to build at a school, of people doing their own professional development. Professional development isn't something that's done to you. It's something that you do yourself, and taking ownership over that. And I think if you provide the tools for people, they're more likely to drive their own professional development.
Claire, there was a lot of nodding there. I kind of essentially
Yeah.
agree with Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Mike's absolutely right. It's about providing that opportunity for people and trusting that, some people will just want to engage. You've got people who just love this stuff and love reading about it and, live and breathe teaching and learning. And they will want, they'll love that opportunity and being given their book, and they'll highlight it and put the post-its in and all of that kind of thing. And there'll be people who perhaps, maybe where they're at in their life or their lifestyle just doesn't provide the time for that, and then that's okay. But I think, as Mike has said, it's just about opening up those opportunities so that people can take ownership of their professional development. And of course, as schools, we support that and we guide that and provide the resources and the foundation, but also it's about encouraging those who are really keen and are really interested, and as Mike said, giving them that option if they want to take it and they're able to take it.
I'm just thinking back to those people we spoke about earlier of like, I'm already doing this, I push back, I don't want to do that. Do you think that's sometimes, Claire, just because it's got a name? You spoke about free, like if someone told me now to do 3 tiered sheets, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to do that. Like, do you think that's because, especially with people who have been in the classroom with lots of experience, like, I've seen these fads come and go. Is this just another one of those which in 2 years you're going to tell me, definitely don't do those 10 things. They are awful things. Do you think, and how would you combat that kind of thought process?
Yeah, and I think I've definitely worked with people who have those kind of suspicions around it, because they said, you know what, I've been in the game long enough, I've seen things come and go, I know what it's like, initiatives start, they don't get followed through. And I guess the thing that I have kind of gone back to people with is that, look, we've never been in as good a place as we are now in education in terms of really having access to evidence-informed conclusions around effective teaching. And I kind of then show them the similarities between things like Professor Rocco's paper on what makes great teaching, and then things from the EEF and Rosenshine and Doug Lemov, and saying, they're all reaching the same conclusions. So really consider the place we're at now in education and how much more confident we can feel that these are our best bets. But I also say to them, look, I can't promise you that 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, there's going to be, a load of research and evidence that comes out and kind of really counters everything that we've been looking at. But I would be more surprised if that did happen. But I kind of say we have to engage with what we have and just be confident in what we have. That's all we can do. There's no point kind of saying, well, I'm not going to engage with this because it might change or something new might come out and say something completely different. And I guess it's also about kind of really showing people, look, we're in this for the long haul with this, that we are going to keep coming back to it. This is going to kind of provide, the framework, the pillars, whatever you want to call it, for great teaching in our school. And just, I guess, really showing people that this isn't something you're just going to engage with for a few months before forgetting about it, that actually this really is something that you're going to adopt for the long haul.
By giving them things that they can then go and see in their classroom that make a difference, and then they can build off that feedback, which is a really good point, Claire, because that's what we're talking about in the next part of our Rosenshine's 10 Principles of Instruction. So thank you, Claire, for joining us for this part. Mike, as always, what a pleasure to have you on the pod. Listeners, we'll be back next time with our final part, on Rosenshine's 10 Principles of Instruction. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.